I figured I'd talk to you a little bit about this new product from OpenAI called Atlas. It's their Gen AI Atlas browser, which basically allows you to browse the internet using Gen AI as a sidekick, or you can hand over the keys and your logins and your passwords to a Gen AI browser to do things like accomplish tasks for you, maybe complete some of the toil in your day to day. All of this sounded extremely scary to me when I heard about it, especially after I watched Rory's recent video about containerizing Gen AI applications. And I think he was talking about deleting code. I'm pretty worried about giving keys to maybe something like a GitHub, or in this case, I was using Azure Portal and Datadog because some of those credentials could be pretty serious if leaked or maybe costly to me. So I went on a bit of a hero's quest, I suppose, trying to figure out how to virtualize macOS first, because right now this browser is macOS only. So my common tools for Linux or Windows didn't apply here. So it meant that I had to go a bit back to the drawing table, figure a few things out that I thought I could talk about in terms of isolating macOS hosts, but also talk a little bit about the browser, some of the things that I thought were cool, and some of the things that I thought were a little bit scary in terms of security, which is how I ended up down this path. Have you heard about this browser, played around with it at all?
Yeah, I haven't played with it, but yeah, I was aware of it last week or whatever. So yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I was away in Japan, but I figured when I came back, I should have some content that's fairly interesting. So this is what I was thinking about while I was away, and I just got a quick little overview here. Basically, what I wanted to talk about was Atlas itself. So this is OpenAI's browser. I'm using it now, so we're showing Atlas in Atlas. Funnily enough, it's full screen, but you can kind of see it's just a standard Google browser. Uh, Good and bad there. One thing is that most of the things that you'd expect to work in Google do in fact work. The bad thing is when I'm trying to find some of these sessions, say for example, in product analytics on the Datadog side, or maybe even just on my side, trying to figure out if I can find logs from these sessions, it looks like they come up as Chrome in a specific build. So it might be a little bit harder to find in that case. But on the other hand, when taking this and trying to figure out where this would land in macOS, I start to think about things that I've used before, say QMU, or maybe VMware Fusion I've used before to do macOS host, but none of those are really answers now in the Tahoe era. But there is one, sorry, I'll zoom in a little bit more here. There is one framework that still works, which is the Apple Virtualization Framework. Now, it came out in OS 11 plus, it says here. I believe in Sequoia is when it really hit its stride, and in Tahoe, things changed a little bit in terms of there's a new virtualization framework disk that you can use. It's like a sparse bundle, so it doesn't take up a lot of space, which is good. On top of this, in terms of cloning those hosts, if you need to make multiple copies on your operating system, you can use something called the Apple copy on write clone. So essentially it's a zero overhead clone, so it doesn't take a lot of time, which is awesome. It does take space as soon as they start diverging, but in terms of that immediate clone that you've got, it's very fast, which is nice. So a few new technologies and the newer versions of the operating system. But what I was familiar with was VFkit, which is kind of an easy way to use this virtualization framework. Unfortunately, it doesn't really support Mac OS hosts, but a lot of the code that's in there will get you all the way down the path for Linux and Windows hosts. So if you want to use something that's pretty easy to use to do most of your virtualization without paying any licensing, VFkit is probably your way to go. Now, going down this path, I started searching, basically trying to grasp at straws. Do I have to write something in Swift 2 or Swift 5, I guess is the case now? Or is there something else that I could use? And lo and behold, I came across something called VirtualBuddy. Not the best name for a piece of software, I gotta admit, but it is running. So we're in a VM right now. I'll go up to about, and we'll show kind of the about this Mac so you can see it. So I did get it running. It's running. I only gave it half my memory. Sorry, I realize it's a little bit hard to see, and I can't really zoom in at this point in time. But it does say Apple Virtual Machine 1 here. It does say that it's M4 Max. Oh, we'll empty our trash here. And it also shows that it's on this disk and it's running Tahoe. So all good stuff. But let's swap back to our browser. My apologies. Right down here. Okay. And then from there, I was able to get this running essentially in that host. So I'll see if I can drag over VirtualBuddy. I made a Sequoia host because this is running on a Sequoia operating system. And then from there, I was able to launch this host. So essentially, if I click on this, you can actually go into, my apologies, they look like this. So it's just a standard host, looks kind of like the same as most that you'd see. And then what you can do is actually just clone a host. If you right click, you can click duplicate, and it'll create that almost zero overhead APFS copy for you. It's about 60 gigs at least for each of these. So I realize this is almost pedantic at this point in time, but it is a little bit difficult to create a clone of a macOS host these days. So I figured I'd go over it because if you do want to test this, I really feel like this browser should be cordoned off into its own little playpen or sandbox or what have you. I honestly don't feel like this is a good candidate to install on your host and log in right now, but I do feel like it's great for dev tooling, which is where I figured I'd show it off. But one of these things I was able to do is go through and look at tags, for example. So I could go through and tell it, hey, there's some tags missing. Please go through and check the tags. And I just want to quickly demo what this looks like. So for example, again, I can't recommend logging into your Azure portal in prod with your credentials logged in. This is my test account. I'm just using tests. And it will, in fact, ask you a few times as you're going through saying like, hey, this is probably not a great idea. You should go into GitHub and to Datadog and your Azure portal and do this stuff. And you have to confirm it as you go, which is good. But I still feel like it's probably worth babysitting. But if we go through and say continue tagging, for example, I should be able to demo how it moves the mouse around. Now, to get it into this mode under here, there's a little, I can't click it right now when it's browsing, but you have to click it into permissions mode or credentials mode, saying that it's allowed to use these credentials. Once it stops, I can show you, but it's essentially a checkbox. Now, I think in the green room we were talking earlier, you noticed that there's a lot of little dots going around, which was a bit annoying to me. One, for when I'm creating screenshots, for example. Two, when I'm trying to create a movie of what's going on. But I will say it's nice to know that it's actually working. And if I do take a video or a screenshot, it's good to see that I can tell that an agent is actually overlaid on top of this. So I understand one that's a little bit annoying if I want to just do automatic documentation, for example, browse the site, take pictures, put them into my docs. That would be very handy. But I think in this case, if we're actually trying to think about security, or if we're thinking about security, this will actually help quite a bit in terms of telling you, one, that it's working, and two, when you take those screenshots, that you know that this is an agent actually working. Now, for those of you watching, you've probably noticed that this is quite a bit slower than you would work. And I realize that that may seem like a bad thing. Again, I'm trying to be a little bit positive on this. I think it's good, mostly because I want to be able to watch this or supervise it as it goes. This is the first iteration of this tool. I'm sure it's going to get better, but I've already noticed it doing things that are a little bit, not wrong, but just a little bit slightly different than the way I would read instructions or follow them. What I was using for this was an onboarding task. So it's essentially like sign up for my product, make sure that the sign up process is perfect, that it works, that it goes according to my docs. So what I'm trying to do is actually get Datadog and Azure configured, which I've done a lot. I know this process pretty well, but also I noticed after we configured it up, one of the agentless scanners, for example, didn't have tags on it. And as a result, what we wanted to do is start adding those tags into some of those resources that we've created. Now, I could do this in a command line. And in fact, in Azure, you've got the Cloud Shell that you could use. Or I figured it might be more visually interesting to have it walk through and do the tagging. So you can see that it's gone through and done the tags. There were no tag changes to do, so it didn't actually make any changes. So in this case, there's no changes to do, so it can't apply. So it's stuck. It doesn't know how to click apply when apply is grayed out, which is fair. The other is, and this isn't a knock on Azure or Datadog, but sometimes when it loads the UI, it tries to do things so fast that searches won't appear, or things are a little bit slower than it expects. Even though it does operate quite slowly, I feel like sometimes it's worth repeating the instructions or telling it to pause when loading pages prior to inserting things. One thing on the Microsoft side, I'm not sure, Jason, if you remember, when you're typing into Azure, it will do things like autocomplete your search for you, but the first character often takes a second, so you have to type one or two. If you paste in a piece of text, it may not actually do the search properly. It may fail the search and not show any results. So I had to coax it a little bit in terms of teaching it how to find those results. So what we did, I know it's a lot, should be a pretty short video. So we looked at taking a piece of software that can only run in macOS, virtualizing that on macOS using the Virtualization Framework. We're using VirtualBuddy to help us find the IPSW, so that's the software that runs macOS. I'll show in a moment here, but I found those on ipsw.me. Essentially, it's a way to find those public images in order to help you download them, because unless you're in the Apple developer program, it's a little bit harder to find them, or it's easy to find the beta versions, but not the full releases. At any rate, they're public. You can download them using Apple's vetted system, and once doing that, you can bring them up in VirtualBuddy. And once you've got this browser installed, you can, up to you, you can go and use credentials or not. And you can turn on a cloud web browser, you can use GitHub, all these other connections. Again, I was very cautious about the ones that I was using. So I only used web search and I had it logged into GitHub, Datadog, and Azure. But once you've got all of this, you can take this same virtual machine and then break it down into something that your team could use. Or, and this is the final thing, I buried the lead here a little bit. Or in my case, what I think is actually really interesting is using this browser as part of a test. So let's say I changed a button and I pushed it to prod, and I think the button color should be red, but I don't want to rewrite either a Puppeteer, a Playwright, a Selenium, or a JMeter test. This might be something that's a little bit more human-like or human in the loop-like that you could put in as part of your testing in order to allow you to test features in the front-end side on the web. Now, I'm really interested in things like Guacamole, so remote connections to other servers and what this would look like for that, or maybe even systems management for remediation in test environments. I'm not there yet, still early days. I'm still a little bit cautious, let's say, or I still have security in mind after watching Rory's video from last week. So for me, I feel like containerization is the best way forward to test this out. And of course, scripting macOS host is not that difficult. It's very similar to BSD or Linux, so it's not that hard. But essentially, imagine you've got a GitHub runner that's running macOS, and on top of that runner, you've got this browser, and that browser can use a command line in order to go and test the site and then report back results. So I feel like that's the best case scenario, and I'm going to continue on that path. But to get there involved a little bit of heavy lifting that I figured I'd share with the team.
Okay. When I was watching it dance around on the screen, it does take its time, but
Yes.
it also does have some kind of quick movements around between
Yes.
elements. Did it
Yes.
ever feel like it was moving too fast? Like, oh wait, if you look away,
Absolutely.
you missed what happened.
Yeah, absolutely. One is when it's doing form fills, I think it tabs between the forms very quickly. In fact, I think that's how it tripped up the search in Azure a couple times and in Datadog, honestly, for both. It was just a little bit too automated, a little bit too fast. The other is it seems like it can open tabs that you can't always see, which is a problem. So it will be focused on a tab that you're working on, but it may actually be doing research in other tabs, which is fine. But in the case of some of the Datadog docs, it felt like it was doing web searches and picking up the wrong results. I'm sure you know the web is a little bit different than it used to be these days. So sometimes the top results aren't what you want. They could be an ad, or they could be from like a competitor, or maybe it's going to the Azure docs instead of the Datadog docs. But I can't tell which tab it's in, unfortunately. And as a result, it's difficult to coax it to say, oh, actually, you opened up the wrong tab, try this one. So I end up stopping it and sort of course correcting a little bit, but I still can't see the tab that it opened up. It's not in one of my tabs. It's in a web search. You know, when you're dealing with a Gen AI LM and you tell it to do like deep research and it says, okay, I'm going to these 5 sites, but you can't actually see what it's doing on those sites. It will do that in the browser, and you can't see the tab that it's in, or it's not in any other tabs, but the web search has actually happened. So I think for me, that was a little bit odd because it's filling the context with things that may not be correct, but also because it feels like it's a bit hidden, and it happens fairly quickly, even though the rest of this is quite slow when it's moving the mouse around, for example. It felt like that portion at least could be a little bit more obvious or less hidden, less opaque.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we don't need more black boxes.
I don't
Feel
think
like
so. Yeah. I will say, and this isn't a plug for Datadog or anything like that, but one of the first things I was trying to do is get it to hit a site and record using Rum. You could use Playwright for this or what have you. But I did feel like any of these sessions that are running, I would like a video history of. I don't need them for months or years, but I do want a bit of an audit log, essentially, of what actually happened. I'd like to see, one, the session that's prompting it, and two, how it's reacting, because I guess without that safety net, I feel like, since this is me, like I'm driving this self-driving car, so to speak, I'm still responsible for what the browser is doing. So I do want to know what it's done. So having some sort of screenshot, video evidence, log file for me also feels good, because I'm same as you. I'm not a fan of black boxes.
Yeah, and even just in retrospectives, like assuming you still do those, to
Mhm.
look back at what happened is really important to learn from, and set things up moving forward. If you don't know what happened, then you can't make a lot of adjustments.
Right.
So yeah, there's a lot of things to think about in there. I mean, abstractions just like where we are, trying to move
Correct.
more away, but yeah. I do like the idea of containing it. for now, because there's just a lot of unknowns, and this type of stuff
Agreed.
feels a little bit more risky. Um, so okay, cool. Well, thank you for sharing with us
Of course.
another item in the great unknown of Gen AI. And we'll get through this together.
Absolutely. Keep testing. And what is it? Trust but verify. I
Yep.
guess for this one in particular.
Yep. Exactly. All right. Thanks, Ryan. We'll talk to you next time.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason.